Hi, my name is Bella. I am a 30-year-old Australian, and when I was 20 or 19 maybe, I was diagnosed with a malignant paraganglioma. I since then have had probably about 15 operations. I undertook radiotherapy, and I now live in the UK. I work as a comedian and a nanny. I've also been part of a documentary about a cancer fraud that happened in Australia, and I was on reality TV for a really short stint as well. When I was 15, I started throwing up a lot. It was an uncontrollable urge. I never stuck my fingers down my throat. I never tried to throw up. It was more like suddenly I would get this feeling and I had to throw up. But it was violent. I was throwing up bile. My teeth started rotting away. It was horrific. I stopped being able to eat or keep food down. I started experiencing a lot of dizziness. My heart rate dropped really, really dangerously low. And I sort of just had like a bit of swelling in my neck. And when I presented with all of these symptoms, the doctors, and I saw multiple doctors, they saw that I had mental health issues on my file, and I was immediately diagnosed with anorexia bulimia. And from that point on, I was put in a box, and I never had a single scan. I never had any further testing. I also had a chronic cough, and I would cough so hard I broke a rib once. It was horrific, and so I wasn't sleeping either. I missed like half a year of school and nearly failed year 10 as well. And this went on until I was 19. So from the ages of 14, 15 to 19, I also went through really invasive anorexia treatment. They use this it's a technique that I think has been since debunked to be effective in treating anorexia patients, but it's called family therapy, and essentially my entire family had to be involved, and we did it weekly for years, and it was horrific. They would weigh me, and I started putting weights in my pockets and wearing weights on my legs, and I got down to about 44 kilos, which is like I'm like a healthy 65 now, so that's like 20 kilos off my small frame, and I just looked like death all the time, but yeah, no one ever sent me off for a scan, which when I look now, I'm just like, oh my God. And it also destroyed my family for a long time. I have a great relationship with my parents now, but we didn't talk for a long time when all this was going on. And so when I finally turned 18, I moved out of home. I moved to the city. I was a musician and a singer. So I was chasing my career, playing gigs. And, I had a sort of record deal on the books, and I was doing really, really well, but I wasn't doing really well. I was also dying. And it started getting a lot worse in 2014. And I used to sleep with a bucket next to my bed because I would just wake up, throw up, go back to sleep. I probably would keep down maybe like one piece of toast a day, a lot of energy drinks just to kind of survive. And I started noticing that when I was playing gigs that my voice was starting to fail. I couldn't hit the notes that I used to hit. I was finding it harder and harder to talk. And just like overall did not look good. Did not look okay. My hair was falling out. My teeth were falling out. Anyway, so I remember waking up one night after I'd thrown up, and I said to myself, and I used to Google my symptoms, and it would always come up with cancer. But the doctors were so adamant that I had an eating disorder that was all, like I'd just been gaslit for so long. When I tried to push back against the doctors, they'd always said, no, that's your eating disorder talking. That's the voice in your head. And I was like, I don't think I have a voice in my head. I was like, I don't think I have a voice in my head. And they're like, oh, that's the voice. Like, that's it. It's telling you. And I was like, okay, there's a voice in my head, but I don't know about it. I was like, I can't hear. Anyway, they even diagnosed me with anxiety and psychosomatic. like that my symptoms were psychosymptomatic. My cough was asthma. Never had asthma. I don't have asthma. So all these things. So it got to the point where in 2014, I was like, I know I'm dying. I could feel it. And I thought to myself, I was like, if I don't get better by the end of this year, I'm just going to kill myself because I cannot keep living like this. Like every day was so much pain. I was taking like packets and packets of codeine every day, like from over the counter, just to get through. Like it would be like 2 tablets of Panadine Fort and a Red Bull. And that was what I lived off for months and months and months. And it was the only way that I could get through the days. And then it got to August and I burnt my hand, like just something so mundane. And I went to the doctors because I was like, oh, my hand's a bit. And this GP who I'd never seen before in my life in this random clinic in Melbourne took one look at me and was like, what is wrong with you? And I was like, oh, I burnt my hand. And he was like, no. And by this point, I had a huge lump in my neck. And the doctors had always told me that I just had a swollen gland. So I said to him, I was like, oh, it's a blocked gland. And he goes, what the fuck is a blocked gland? I was like, I don't know. I was like, that's just what they've been telling me this whole time. So he looked at me and was like, he's like, your burn is fine. He's like, your hand's going to be fine. He's like, you need to have like an ultrasound, like immediately. And she put the, the gel and all that kind of stuff on my neck and it hurt. Oh my God, it hurt so much. And she just kind of went really quiet. And she's like, oh, excuse me a minute. And she goes out. And then a doctor comes in. And then looking at the screen. And, like I'm laying there and the screen's here. And I'm just kind of like, hey, like, what's up, guys? And then another doctor came in. And then they sort of sat down and there's an energy shift in the room. And you can feel it. As a woman, we know that energy shift so well. We're attuned to it. But I immediately was like, yeah, there's something going on. And they said, look, we think you need a CAT scan. We can get you in tomorrow morning. I got to Monday morning. My dad picked me up and we went to I didn't even see the GP that I'd originally seen. It was like the head of the clinic. And he basically just sat down. He's like, it's a giant tumor. He's like, we're pretty sure that there is a huge tumor in your neck and you have cancer and we need to immediately get you in to the Royal Melbourne Hospital. And like, you need to have surgery. You need to see this specialist. Like we need to do it right now. And I kind of stood up. Like my first like bodily instinct was to just stand up. And my dad just said, it's okay, Bella, you go out. I'll deal with this. And yeah, and then within, I think it was that day, we went and saw the specialist, and he said it's either this really rare tumor called a paraganglioma that he's like, but it wouldn't be that. You're too young. He said, or it's Hodgkin's lymphoma. My gut reaction was relief because I just knew that everything anyone had ever said to me was not true. But I had been gaslit for so long to think that I was crazy. And that these feelings I had were like, I was just crazy. But I had been so isolated for so long in my illness. Like no one knew how bad it was. And I had pulled away from my family and my friends because I didn't want anyone, like the cat that knows it's dying. Like I just knew that I was dying and I didn't know how to share that or vocalize it because every time I did, everyone's like, oh, you're crazy. Like, don't worry about it. So for a doctor to finally just be like, you have like something seriously, seriously wrong. It was like a vindication. There was a relief. There was a lot of fear, but it was like, ultimately I was like, okay, like I might actually live. When I went and saw the specialists, the immediate thing was like, we need to get you into surgery ASAP. The tumor was, I think it was like 7 by 4 centimeters or something. Like it was huge, like, and sitting right here in my neck. And what I didn't know was it was impinging on my vagus nerve system. And so that's why I was throwing up. And that's why I was feeling this twinge in my vocal cords all the time. It's like sucking the life out of me. And so they didn't know because I was so young. I'm the youngest person to have ever been diagnosed with a malignant paraganglioma in Victoria. But at the time, they said they're like, there's no chance it's cancerous. They said it's a 2% chance that it would be cancerous. So the original plan was that I would have the surgery and they would leave little tiny bits because it was a very slow growing tumor. But they would leave my vocal cords. So they would just leave a little bit of the tumor on my vocal cords, and maybe every 5 years I'd have a little touch up. So that way they could, like, because I was a singer. So I was terrified. I was like, I can't lose my voice. When I went in to have the surgery, it was meant to be 4 hours, but it took upwards of 8 hours. And I woke up and I mean, you know, when you wake up from surgery and you're just like, oh, where am I? Like, what about? But I knew immediately that there was something wrong because I tried to speak and nothing came out. And I tried to sit up and like blood just started, it's a bit graphic, but it started pouring out of my mouth. And I realized I couldn't swallow. So I started choking. And obviously they don't really want you to choke to death after you've had major surgery. So all the nurses ran in and grabbed a suction tube and stuck the suction tube down my throat to pull out all the blood that I was choking on. It was pretty traumatic to wake up to. I've had better mornings. And then I sort of was so out of it and so on so many painkillers, I didn't really start to understand the extent of how bad it had been until like a few days later. But I remember everyone was kind of avoiding letting me look at myself. But when I looked in the mirror, I knew that like something really bad had happened. I essentially had like stroke-like symptoms. So the whole right side of my face had been paralyzed. My eye had completely dropped. Like the whole shape of my eye had changed. I couldn't talk. I could whisper very, very slightly. My tongue wasn't working and I couldn't swallow. So for the first 4 days, I was nil by mouth. So no water, nothing. And that was like, oh my God, that was the most horrific part of anything because I love water. Like water is just my best friend. And I had the driest mouth and I would dream about like diving into waterfalls. I still remember the dreams I had. And all I was allowed to do was put lip balm on. It was horrific. And on top of that, I had a tube next to my bed that was like a suction tube. And so every time the blood would get too overwhelming in my mouth, I would just go, and then suck it all out. It was disgusting. But that was like the only, because I could not swallow spit. I couldn't swallow anything. I would start choking quite violently. So by that point, they decided to put in a nasal gastric tube, which is the tube that runs from your nose down to your stomach. And they started to teach me how to feed myself with a syringe. So I started working with a speech pathologist quite extensively. And she taught me how to swallow using a technique. I can't remember what it's called, but essentially I turn my head to the right-hand side, which blocks my windpipe, and the muscles on the left-hand side take over. And so it's kind of like a manual swallow. Yeah, it's really interesting. So that's how I swallow to this day. I can't swallow. If I try to swallow with a straight head, I usually choke. I remember my doctor coming in and he was like, he sort of sat us down. He's like, look, it was much worse than what we thought. We've sent some things off for tests. He never said the C word, but he implied it with his eyes. And he said, I'll never forget, he said, when we cut you open, the inside of you was like a rotten fruit. He's like, we had to cut out everything. He's like, it was black. And I was like, I didn't know the inside of me could be black. But I remember him saying, he's like, it was black, like rotten. And so what had happened was the tumor was wrapped around everything, and it had spread to all my lymph nodes, and it was at the base of my skull. And my timeline's a little whiffy here, but he said that without saying that I had cancer. But I was like, well, it doesn't spread like that unless it's cancerous. But he was like, he refused to give it a proper diagnosis until we got the lab results back. So I was dealing with the fact that I now had, essentially what had happened was I had half my vocal cords, half my esophagus, my arm. I lost mobility in my right arm as well. I went and met with the specialist that was going to be treating me, but because my cancer was so rare, they hadn't treated anyone with this specific diagnosis before. Right before I had radiotherapy, they put me in a specialized scan. They did that scan on me, and so the atoms, the radioactive atoms, are meant to stick to cancer cells, so it lights up in the scan. And they did the scan on me, and nothing came up. And they said, they're like, oh, look, we think it might have been a mistake. Like, we're going to do some more tests, because they were so adamant that I was going to die. Like, it was in my brain. So I did 2 other scans, another radioactive one and another one that I can't remember. And I remember my doctor sitting me down, and he's like, Bella, this is a miracle. Like, he's like, I'm not religious. I don't believe in miracles. He's like, I'm a science man, but like, for this to not be in your brain, if I left it a week longer, I don't think I would be here, because it was just, he said, he's like, 1 cell in your brain and you'd be dead. Like, it was just like that. And so the fact that it hadn't gotten to my brain was just, it was crazy. I put on a lot of weight really quickly, and then had to start radiotherapy. I did 6 weeks, 5 days a week for 6 weeks of like the highest dose. So I remember like just the feeling of my skin, like I could feel myself burning, like burning from the inside out. And when you have radiotherapy, you have to stay completely still. And because mine was in my head and my neck, I had to be strapped to the bed with a mask that was fitted to my body. So we had to go in first and have the mask made. And it's essentially like a netted plastic, and they get it, it's soft, and they lay down and they put it over you, and it hardens. And so it's fitted completely to your face. I always remember I cried every day, like just like, and you can't wipe your tears away because your hands are pinned. So just laying there crying every day. And it was so isolating because I was too old to be in the children's ward, but I was far too young to be in the ward that I was. I saw no one my own age, and I had no one really to speak to about it either. So it was just, again, like another form of isolation that my illness forced upon me. I found radiation was difficult because right before I started, they sat me down and they were like, look, it's uncomfortable. We're essentially burning you from the inside out. There's going to be scarring. It's going to be painful. You're probably going to, by this point, my voice had come back a tiny bit. So I was talking in like a hoarse whisper. Like, when like you get a cold and you lose your voice, that was me just like all the time. And he said, you're probably going to lose your voice again. And then he said, I remember him saying, he's like, your hearing is going to be damaged as well. And you're going to lose your salivary gland, like on this side too. And I just remember crying so much about losing my hearing, because I was like, just another thing. And I've lost my voice. I've lost I'm going to lose part of my hearing. Like, what else? Am I going to lose my vision next? Like, I was so mad about that. And it wasn't, I lost about 25% of my hearing, But I actually last year had a medical episode, and I've ended up losing 80% of my hearing in this year. The plan of action has always just been monitor. Um, but what I actually found out was because my cancer was so rare and so strange to have presented in such a young person, my family and I ended up undertaking genetic testing. And it turns out that we have, on my mother's side, and the vast majority of my cousins and my aunties and my family have it. But this, oh God, I can't remember what it's called, but a specific genetic mutation that makes us susceptible to certain strains of cancer. So after learning that, I kind of just felt like it was going to come back. I was like, it was just like I always sort of thought I was going to die. I never actually really came to terms with the fact that I was going to live. And it's probably not until like I just turned 30 this week. It was my 30th birthday this week. So, and that's like a milestone I never, ever, ever thought I'd reach. I have had a few like things pop up over the last 10 years. I had cervical cancer cells cut out a few years ago. I've had tumors pop up in my breast that I had removed. And I have had like a few times where they thought the cancer had come back. Last year, they thought I had a brain tumor. It was not a brain tumor. But yeah, um, there's always been like that underlying, like, is this the year that it comes back? Or is this the year that something comes back? Which I think is pretty normal for anyone who's had cancer. After I finished cancer treatment, I was so angry and lost, and I didn't know who I was. And I just partied. And it's and I'm really fun, and like like I'm a great person to be around, but my mental health issues were pretty clear. I lost a lot of friends um, that I don't regret losing, because ultimately I think everyone just wanted. Once I finished treatment, everyone was like, "Oh, well, that's over. Like, let's move on." But it's never been over for me. Like, this has been something I've been living with ever since. Like, the long term effects have never stopped. And so I was not only navigating my loss of my career and my identity, but also navigating this whole new body that just felt so foreign to me. I managed to get use of my right arm back after a lot of physiotherapy. I had plastic surgery on my eye to try and fix it. It's not exactly back to how it was, but it's a lot better than what it was. And I also got really into fillers and Botox to try and kind of hide things, which, when you're young. But I look back now and I'm like, it was all just a big mask to try and reclaim. I don't know. I just really, really struggled for a long time with finding myself. And it wasn't actually until COVID and lockdown that I remember when I was suddenly in a house by myself and I couldn't go out and I couldn't party and I couldn't go to the pub. I'm the most boring person I know. I have no hobbies. I have no interests. I stopped playing music, and that was my entire existence. And since then, my only hobby was getting absolutely blackout wasted and going for 4 days. Like, and I just looked at myself and I was like, I am the most boring person I have ever seen in my life. So I made it. 2020 was great for me because I made it my mission to try and heal, and I ended up finding a cancer group that was like all female, and it was run by a girl that I'd met in Melbourne who had leukemia as a child. And for the first time ever, I had sat down, we just did Zoom calls, but to be in a space with a bunch of women that, like, I never thought what I felt was normal. And then this girl's like, oh yeah, I felt like, yeah, me too. And I was like, oh my God, I'm not alone. And that was the first time in my entire journey from the age of 15 that I'd ever felt not alone in what I went through. And it was such a healing space for me. It's been a 10-year journey of finding myself again, of grief, and of, like, just being able to accept that, like, I'm okay now and I'm gonna live. So yeah, so like all the people that just thought it was over after I finished radiotherapy, like it's never over. It's a forever thing. The one piece of advice I'd give someone is that you aren't alone, and I think community is everything. I read a book that really changed my life. I love books, but there's not many that changed my life. And the one that did, it's called Lost Connections. I can't remember the author, but if you Google Lost Connections, and it's essentially, it starts out as a journalist. It starts out with a journalist who wants to investigate the pharmaceutical company and the prescribing of antidepressants. But what it actually turns into is a man who figures out that as a society, most of our mental health issues stem from lack of community. And that just resonated with me so much, because when I found my community of other cancer survivors, that was when I truly started healing. And yeah, I think knowing that you're not alone and that your feelings, whilst you are an individual, your feelings are they're not crazy, you're not crazy. Like, your feelings are so normal for what you're going through. And yeah, that would be my advice, is like, reach out to people, find community. You got to talk about it.